Chaturvedi. I think it's great points that a lot of people have mentioned. I especially like to call what I'm doing a rural enterprise, not a social enterprise. And the reason for that is I believe that the real value comes when you create value. It is not about charity, because again, this is a discussion we were having during lunchtime with Ms. Runa Khan. And we realized that charity, especially when in context of India, is something which you do to ease your conscience. It is not about really helping, it is about easing your conscience. Anyway, having said that, that's a little bit of a prelude, but really fun listening to Tricia, and I think a lot of things that I share with her. I'll go back to the time that it started out for me back in 2002 in business strategy class at University of Pennsylvania, where everyone talked about how you disconnect from your emotions when you're looking at your goals. And I somehow, it just did not ring a bell. I mean, how can I not be attached to my BMW and still be working towards it? Or how can I be not attached to something which I'm trying to acquire and still not be emotionally attached to it? It just didn't make sense. Up until a point where I was sitting in this business strategy class and we were going through this lesson on business strategy, Swan Tzu's quote, and then further with Bhagavad Gita, that really changed the way I looked at life and business as a whole. Second thing that happened, which about 4 years ago, I read Chanakya Niti. And fortunately so, I should have actually read it much before that, when all of us, and incidentally my last job was with banking, I realized that a lot of us are just chasing money, chasing value, chasing wealth, without really knowing what is it that's defining a quality of life. Is it really the wealth that you're creating, or is it the things that you're acquiring with it, or is it how things are making you feel what you're acquiring? So back in 2005, I was traveling on an assignment to Dubai. Burj Al Arab, for those of you who don't know, is probably the world's tallest hotel and filled, sprawling with wealth. The one thing, I stood in front of Burj Al Arab, looking at these majestic fountains with fire and water, and looking at Burj Al Arab itself. It's painted, walls painted with gold and emerald faucets and whatnot. The one thought that came to my mind was Prince Al Walid. What does he eat when he is hungry, and what does he drink when he's thirsty? And that fundamentally changed the way I looked at what I was trying to accomplish. So back in the last job with Citi, till about 2009, I was going through a lot of statistics, lots of number crunching, and you guys are engineers, smart enough to figure out, a lot of things didn't just make sense. And if any of you have looked at the Economic Times today, it sort of spells it out for you. 70,000 crores in debt write-offs by the government of India, farm loan debts, and yet you have the largest number of MFIs floating around in the country, and the largest MFI IPO that happens last year, 2010. You've got people talking about us being an agrarian economy, and yet we're battling with the highest food grain prices amongst all the nations around. Okay, you look at we're calling ourselves an agrarian economy, but we've got the largest tracts of uncultivated land masses, and we don't even know where what's happening. Similarly, again, with the average household incomes and expenses, if I were to look at it, most of the rural India expenses are less than 1/10 of what it is in urban India. And the reason for that is that there is no supplementary income over there, so they basically survive in what is with them, and most of it is actually owned by themselves. Most importantly, insurance industry penetration in life insurance is less than 5%, and this industry has been around for the past 50 years. The who's who of the world insurance companies are here, and yet you don't have the insurance penetration for that that you would expect. The most important reason for that is that India, as a country, you have to really understand the fabric of the country. In India, a Kentucky Fried Chicken still sells vegetarian burgers. In India, a McDonald's doesn't sell a Big Mac, it sells a Maharaja burger, which is again a vegetarian burger. So having said that, you've got to really go to the depths. Now, when you're talking about 80% population in rural India, what you have to also understand that a farmer's primary need is his land, not his life. So needless to say, he'll never buy a life insurance if it's at the cost of his land. So I decided to quit my job, and fortunately, just around the time that I was about to leave, came across the second quote that investment bankers will till the land and farmers will drive Ferraris. So clearly I wasn't the only one. I was thinking right. Next. And that resulted in HarVa. harnessing value of rural India. It wasn't about juicing value of rural India, it wasn't about selling to rural India, it was just about value creation and then harnessing the same. Next one. So there I was, tilling the land. Because I figured that if I could till the land and make enough money, then it definitely has to add value and lower the food grain prices. I mean, looking at Economic Times, you have onion and single malt whiskey being discussed on the same page in Economic Times. That's worrisome for me. So clearly, went out, collaborated with farmers, realized that there's a huge gap in terms of electricity shortage, there's no water, they don't have the right fertilizers, they don't have the right knowledge from the horticulture departments. What to farm, where to farm, when to farm, was clearly something that was missing. So most of these guys do end up just cultivating one crop, right, one season. And every income is just seasonal. At most, they're earning about 1,500 to 2,000 rupees per month per acre, which is, again, something when you think about it, on an average, if a farmer doesn't have any land, that's, of course, a totally different problem. But if they do have a land, then their income is not more than 2,500 to 3,000 rupees a month per acre. Convincing the farmers is not easy, because what you're trying to do, the model that I was trying to follow was that if it is a low agricultural produce area, then clearly there will be enough need for these farmers to farm for something which will increase their throughput. So if it is because of lack of rainfall, clearly they could go with cash crop farming. After 4 years of cash crops, the land would be arable enough to do organic farming. It made sense to me, but how do you convince these guys? It's just not possible. Why? Because most of these people are earning on a seasonal basis. If they don't earn for one season, you cannot go and convince them to give them or pledge their land for another crop. So clearly there was something missing, and that's when we got back to the drawing board and we realized that in order for us to sustain, we needed to have something which is annuity-based income, which is going to tap this value in rural India. And so clearly, after a lot of thinking, the one and only answer was a rural BPO. A rural BPO would definitely make sense because in a low agricultural produce area, the people's inclination and intent to work would be a lot higher. Their education levels would be a little better. And so clearly we could employ these people in the routine process-oriented jobs. Now, all this while we actually we traveled across the country from Bhuj in Gujarat to Puri in Odisha and J&K in north through Kanyakumari in south. And the only realization was that, of course we have to go with the rural youth, the girls, the guys, and basically train them and employ them in jobs until our conventional thinking affected us. We went to the places close to the highway. So we went to a place called Bhiwadi. It's an industrial township. I mean, it was easy to think that there would be abundant electricity. It's industrial township, so it is definitely educated population, and we'd be able to find enough people. So we got about 100-odd girls and guys, and we trained them. And after about 3 months, all of them walked away. None of them wanted a job. And we were surprised. We were thinking, this is a rural area, they don't have a job. Most of these people were not looking to get a job, they were just looking to get a certificate. All the guys who had sold their land in anticipation of the highway coming up to their, next to their lands were going to become millionaires, and all they wanted to do was drink all day. The girls just wanted to get married. All they wanted a certificate for their mother-in-laws. Okay? So the area that we were not looking at so far, and we traveled across, right? We came to, finally the strategy was to go a little further away from the highway and not necessarily look at the industrial areas. We looked at the homemaker in the villages, the caretaker, the household worker. And we realized that this was one lady. Now, interesting statistics in the village. All of us are used to 3 times a meal every day. We eat the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In a village, it's only twice. It's brunch, which is early brunch, and it's dinner, which is slightly early dinner. So in the middle, these women are pretty much empty. And after touring the villages, we realized that this is probably the place where a lot of this workforce would come about. And so we gathered a lot of people, again, girls, guys, women, everyone, whoever wanted to come, and experimented. And we realized that most of these women were actually very keen on working, but they had a limitation. They could not leave their village. We said, not a problem, we'll set it up right here, so long as you're keen. Now the next slide that I'll show you is something I can bet my life none of you in this hall can do, which this lady did. It was the 8th pass, and she did it in about 4 hours straight. Now, it's interesting because I still cannot recite that keyboard. Every time I present it, I look at my keyboard and think if it's right or not. Now, why is it important? Why was this a eureka moment? Because, we don't really think about it, but if my car broke down outside, I will not even think twice to come back to Delhi Technological University. I'll probably go to the next mechanic, right? So if your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic, you don't go to an engineer. And that's what is important in these data processing jobs. What I realized is the inclination is there. She doesn't have that much education. She's committed to work at the center for about 6, 7, 8 hours. And she's already memorized the keyboard in 4 hours straight. I mean, that is huge, given that she's never looked at the computer before. So then we started to go out in bulk. And we said no to men. For our rural XPOs, which is ex-process outsourcing, the best suited people are women. And so we interviewed about 500, 600 women at a stretch. And we went to the next one, village after village. We basically gathered these women, the workforce. We trained them for about 6, 7, 8 months. And what came out was an all-women rural BPO. Incidentally, we call it a rural XPO because we believe in outsourcing any kind and type of work to these women. Now, the reason I've written that it's not about women empowerment is because that's a must. What we're trying to reward here is their competence. We give them work because they do it best, because they're best suited. The moment I say empowerment, I already sort of put it down. It doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. Because they're able to do it, that's why it makes sense. The bigger challenge over here was to be able to get women and girls as managers and team leaders from the cities. It was next to an impossible task. Even if the village was about 30 kilometers from the city, we had to really, stretch out to reach out to the parents and convince them that it was a very safe place, it was an all-women outfit, and they definitely had to be there. Now, all-women outfit also has a certain other downsides. A conventional day, I was supposed to go to a meeting, our self-start generator goes down, so you have to start a generator yourself. So clearly, I mean, there are a lot of limitations in rural India, but everything can be overcome, and everything definitely is going to make sense. Now, that is where I'm talking about a socio capitalistic business model. Right? So what is a socio capitalistic business model? By the headlines today, microfinance institutions are suffering, maybe not across, but what doesn't make sense to me is that you're leveraging people who are not earning. So you're giving out loans to people who cannot pay back. So first, you've got to strengthen that bottommost rung. Secondly, you've got to ensure that the farming is happening right. So all the three cogs fit into each other. What we do is we go to low agricultural produce areas, we set up a rural XPO, employ only women. By virtue of that, you're able to convince their husbands that it's possible. They're earning now about 3,500, 4,000, 5,000 rupees a month, depending on how much they work. So clearly, it would make sense for them to go out and start to farm something which will give them better yields. Once the family income comes up, you can actually give them a microfinance loan as well. That's our conventional hut, the proverbial hut in the village, where we sort of set up the rural XPO. We also, given that 80% of the population is in rural India, 80% of the student population is also in rural India, and it actually makes sense to then advise and counsel students to be able to come to these rural XPOs and get advice on where to go. Because guess what? You're sitting here in Delhi Technological University, but about 80 kilometers from here, the students don't even know what IIT Delhi is, right? So it makes sense for us to go out and set up these rural XPOs. Now, once you've got the electricity and the connectivity, then any and all kinds of services can be provided. Now, currently, we're in about 4 states in 20-odd villages, and we have a lot of work. We're doing farming in a couple of states as well. And real quick, I'd like to show you a 2-minute video.
A tractor making its way through farmland, women working the fields, and an unremarkable building that sits in the middle of a village. It's an unlikely location for a call center, but HarVa, based in Haryana's Tikli, is not your usual BPO. The loudest sound here is from the generator that runs the computers, and the employees are local women who, until recently, were all homemakers. Suman Devi still has to complete her household chores before she comes here to work. But this mother of 2 has no complaints.
चेंज बहुत सारा हुआ है. पहले जैसे मेरे हस्बैंड कमाते थे, उनमें कुछ इतना वो नहीं हो पाता था गुजारा, लेकिन यहाँ से अब कुछ सैलरी मिल रही है मुझे, तो उसमें हम अच्छे से वो करते हैं.
Before HarVa can put people to work, it has to train them. And so, it offers to teach the women of Tikli crucial computer skills.
कंप्यूटर सिखाया गया. पहले तो बेसिक ट्रेनिंग दी कंप्यूटर की, फिर ट्रेनिंग के बाद यहाँ पे मतलब काम की ट्रेनिंग दी, उसके बाद हम यहाँ पे काम करते हैं. सोचा नहीं था कि भाई गाँव में ऐसा होगा, लेकिन किसी मतलब लेट भी हो जाए तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, लेट आए तो थोड़ा सा लेट चले जाए, मतलब अच्छा लगता है। हम तो कह रहे हैं जो नहीं कर रहा वो भी आए यहाँ पे करे आते हैं।
HarVa is the brainchild of Ajay Chaturvedi, a US-educated corporate executive. He believes women make ideal employees at a rural BPO.
Initially, we started out with men. We realized that these guys wouldn't really stick around. You give them a training for 4 months, 5 months, and then they leave. They go to the closest city. So we started to experiment with women. So it took us about a year to experiment and come to a conclusion that it actually makes sense. Women, we believe, are the best suited for this work. They're very sincere, they're very focused. More importantly, the women in this village, or any of the other villages that we are present in, wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity, right? They would never actually come out of the village.
Chaturvedi started HarVa because he believes there is untapped potential in India's villages. The tasks here may be no more complex than data entry, and employees only make about 4,000 rupees a month. But Chaturvedi believes that it's a step towards creating value in India's villages. With Pooja Chaturvedi deeply, Anupam Verma, Met.
What doesn't make sense to me is that even important? That is not, right? And that is this essence of real value that you have to understand from the people's perspective who need it. So really, I mean, all we've heard of this old Chinese adage, give a man a fish, teach a man how to fish. But I think there's a long way to go in terms of socio-capitalistic business models. What we need to do is go out, further out, dig a pond, after you teach him how to fish, fill it with rain-harvested water, fill it with, culture fish over there, ask him to fish, and then buy it back from him. But that, I believe, is the future. And thanks very much.